Hey, what's good, guys? Hope everyone had a great weekend. Hope everyone had a good week. Things have been rolling pretty nicely over the past month or two, so I plan on keeping that going. So a lot of that starts with the preparation on the weekend. You guys already know I'm positioned in NVIDIA, QCOM, QQQ, so we'll do a quick review on that. I think I've given a pretty detailed explanation on this, but just kind of looking at this from bare bones on Friday. Big liquidation candle. Pretty much everyone's max levered long and irresponsibly so at the highs, in my opinion. And people are going to be punished for that. And we talk about this all the time, where these major OPEXs towards end of year have a large pull on the market, and typically October, September, we see a pullback in the market that's accumulated by institutions, right? That front rally or front load that rally into end of year. So I've been kind of waiting for this, and we finally got that big sell-off here. We kind of know that this was a capitulation event because VIX did have a spike, albeit it wasn't anything like April, but people probably had PTSD or a flashback to April because it was the same headline, right, where people saw the tariff news, more lows ended up coming, so people escaped out of the market. I wasn't afraid. I grabbed into these high VIX levels, just assuming that that fear would be accumulated because people are now going to step out of the market. And I figured we'd see some kind of accumulation, and then we'd see a meltdown of VIX, right? And that's literally what we're seeing, right? We had a 3-4 day move up on VIX, and then a massive move here on Monday where VIX just completely melted down. I expect VIX to be going lower now that Qs has potentially found a bottom. But yeah, really clean chart here. If we're just looking at volume price analysis with a bar like this on Friday, don't you guys think it's a little weird for how much effort was here that no effort really followed that, right? We had a big we here, and if this was to go lower and the true intent was to go lower, don't you think we would have opened a little bit lower or opened near the close, right? We opened midway through this massive engulfing bar, right? And then after that, we did pull down, but the pullback on this, as you guys can see, wasn't on matching volume. The volume was very, very anemic compared to that Friday capitulation. It didn't break the lows, and if the move was actually to go lower, it probably would have opened under Friday's low, retested Friday's low, and then continued on high volume. The fact that this was mitigated, we opened higher, we did pull back, but it pulled back on decreasing volume, right? That was soaked up. We clearly see a large lower wick coming off of that Friday low. And then what do? Right? We always talk about progression gaps and how they're important on charts. You guys can see it right here. What do? We close above it. We end up getting above this with a gap up, and then it pulls back down, touches the low of that, touches the low of that, touches the low of that. And this looks like the bottom here in this 595, 598 that's kind of been established as like daily lows, but also higher lows relative to Friday's low, right? And if we can take a look at this, they've done this almost picture perfect, guys, where a lot of people, are trying to long the bottom, and they all are breakout traders. So, if you didn't catch the gap up on Monday or from Friday to Monday, it consolidated here, right? As you guys can see, people are looking for the breakout. What does it do? It punishes those people that were late, that didn't get the Friday close. It comes down. Everybody thinks it's going to make a low. You guys can see the high volume accumulation off of that spot. Pushes back up into the progression gap at 598. And what does it do? Rallies. Basically touches the gap fill, as you guys can see right here, right? Off of this candle here, if you guys don't know what gaps are. And what does it do? It sells off, but it sells off on decreasing volume. We get high volume into the close, and then it gaps up, right? So people that were afraid off of the gap fill, maybe expecting a pushback or some kind of lower high, it ends up going higher, right? And then what does it do right off of the open? It sells back down, comes back here, kind of puts in a higher low once again off of this like 595, 598. It manages to hold. It rallies, right? And then what does it do when people are looking for a breakout trade, right? People are looking for this lower high to break. It sweeps through the top, and I detail and in great detail put this in our pre-market chat that it's probably going to sweep here. It swept, sold back down, right? Comes right back down to the 595, 598 spot with all the high volume occurring here, as you guys can continually see, but it doesn't go lower. So high volume with no push down does not signal that the intent is to go further down, right? So this is looking like a bottom here in this range. I like this with a 595, 595, or 598 add in this relative zone. with risk being 589. It just does not seem like it wants to go lower than that. Seeing VIX melt down on Monday kind of gives me signal that, the fear is subsiding now that the accumulation has kind of already occurred for like the past 3 or 4 days. I would, like to see this push up into 610. And I still think, and I made a huge post about this, with liquidity injections coming from not only the reverse repo, right, kind of being completely, I would say, drained. It's at like 4 billion or something when it should be above 400 billion. That's going to get injected, right? We're going to see more liquidity injections coming from the Fed with rate cuts. I still think this goes higher, and then you have to take into consideration earnings as well. I know a lot of people are probably going to be afraid with tech earnings. I still think that they do relatively well. And this isn't to say, right, that this isn't potentially the start of a distribution. I had a lot of people talking to me about this, but this could just be the start of a buy climax, right, where this goes higher and can create like an upthrust or something in this upper region here. But, it's something to be wary of. But, the signs are here that was bottom. That was just a shakeout event, and the pain trade continues to be higher. So, like I said, I like 595, 598. This little progression gap here is kind of like my area to take ads into, with risk being around this Friday capitulation low. So that is the first chart, just kind of reviewing QQQ, thesis behind that, and why I'm bullish on Qs, and then we'll take a look at NVIDIA as well. All right, guys, same exact thing here. Obviously this broke a little bit under Friday's low, so that capitulation bar is low, but once again, wasn't super high volume, and it really respected this gap here. 180 to 178 was kind of the spot I was looking for. This is that highlighted zone. You guys can see it did kind of wick under a little bit here on Wednesday, but for the most part, it's closed back above 180.43 almost every single time. And then you guys can take a look. The past 2 days, right, or I should say 3, have been an inside bar relative to Tuesday's close, but primarily these last 2 days have really seen a constriction of the daily candles, right? The spread is getting really tight, volume starting to dry up. So if this doesn't continue lower off of that scare on Friday and we start to see a shrinkage of the candles, right, that is compression. And if it can't go lower, we should see some kind of move towards the upside, whether it's a short squeeze or, going into NVIDIA earnings. Shorts don't want to carry that risk with price not going lower. We could see some kind of a pre-earnings rally, but I really like how this one is shaping up as well. If we start to move up through 184.80, this is the gap from Tuesday to Monday, right? So this would be a nice little move if we were able to get above this spot here, pull back in base. I would look for this to run into 188, and then if that ends up happening, right, probably take some trims off of my position, but then looking for a move up into 193 to 195. I think a new high could happen. Going into earnings, obviously with NVIDIA, it reports a little bit later, so there is a little bit of inherent risk because earnings is November 19th. My expiration is November 21st. So, there is a time crunch here. So maybe there are some roll opportunities if this ends up happening into the December contracts, or maybe a little bit later in November. I'll have to kind of see what ends up happening. But if we do move into 188, I'll probably trim a good portion of that and try to keep runners for like 195, or if we see a little bit more of a pullback and a basing off 180 to 178, I'll probably add some Decembers. Or if this starts to sell, right, let's just kind of bring that up there. If it starts to sell under 178, close the Novembers, just kind of wait for a pullback, because this is still definitely applicable, where this could pull all the way down into 170 before earnings. Or maybe once maybe the earnings does sell this. I have no idea. Maybe it's a sell the event where they just accumulate off of 170. I would still look for December contracts, guys. So that's obviously an option as well. Decembers would give you plenty of time to kind of let this accumulate off of 170 and then look for a move higher. We'll kind of have to see what ends up happening over the next couple of days, over the next couple of weeks. Ideally, though, this just starts to rally, and that was the bottom. As I said with QQQ, that 595 to 598 progression gap looks like the bottom. The mitigation of selling on NVIDIA looks like this could be the bottom. So this would be really nice if we just kind of broke 184, pushed to 188. We can comfortably trim a good portion of this and then let the remainder run into earnings for maybe a move to 195 or an overshoot. Or, right, if this ends up selling because of earnings, I would, close it a good portion, for a loss, or whatever I have left over for a loss, and then just re-add that same position just for a longer dated contract off of the 170 spot. So that's kind of what I'm looking at for this one. Just a quick little thing on that, and then we'll touch on QCOM as well. QCOM looks pretty good, so we'll jump into that one here as well. Oh, one last thing I want to mention for NVIDIA too. Just looking at extended hours, like just the way that they kind of bait people in, right? So on that inside bar on Thursday, you guys can see just how this consolidated here before Trump's announcement, which ended up being nothing, but a lot of strong buying that was kind of supporting this and preventing it going lower. And then what they did is an overnight session, right? If you manage to go long, or let's say you grab the short, big scare here where it swept underneath 178, and before the cash session even opened, this ended up pushing higher, right? So the only way you caught this is if you took shares. And what did it do? It pulled down about, I would say 3% or something like that. That's not a huge gain on shares, so I can't imagine anybody actually, wanted to get that as a profit. But the fact that it ended up pushing right back up before the morning open, it ended up pushing up higher before the opening print, or actually a little bit higher here in the opening print, and then the first 30 minutes to an hour, right, ended up sweeping out these highs. It pulled back down and then it based 180. So there was another opportunity for sellers to try to crack underneath where their average was, or relatively close, to have that support break again. But it had a nice candle off of that one, and then it just started to press and press and press, and obviously made a new high and closed above the old highs, right? So that's just kind of a little thing here where it's definitely playing with the emotions of shorts and longs. We're just trying to sweep people out. Overnight session is giving people hope, but before the open ends up happening, right before people can take profits on the shorts, or people might have closed positions overnight with shares, you're seeing moves higher. So this is defending really well on all time frames off of this like 178 to 180 spot. All right, QCOM. Also been a little bit of a journey here, but have January contracts, so I haven't been thinking about it too much. Just overall chart had that crazy Friday sell-off where it did pull back a little bit uncomfortably so, where it pulled all the way back down into this progression gap here at 153. But a lot of this thesis is really based off of this old accumulation range back here, right? So this accumulation range all the way back here, with the floor of that being 153, right? 153, 151. You guys can see after this like terminal shakeout or spring back here, how it pushed up. It had a higher low that was pretty obvious, like right around here, which gives it kind of like a trend line. I'm not like the biggest trend line guy, but you guys can see it has like a little trend line that it's starting to develop. So I figured this was just like the second consecutive higher low, and this chart still looked really productive as long as it held 151, right? And we've seen a really nice recovery off of this as well. That Friday capitulation candle, once again, it kind of gapped a little bit higher. It pressed back above 159. The following candle obviously opened here with basically no sell-off from sellers at all. There was no lower wick. It just kind of rallied, pulled back down, rallied again, pulled back down, right? And then now what we're potentially seeing is like a daily sequence higher low, right? Where if this kind of pulls down like this and sees some kind of flag, or something that's a higher low, a little bit above 159, I think this could be a really crazy opportunity for this to push up into like the 172, 174 mark before its earnings, which are coming up here on November 5th. This is kind of what I'm looking for, just some kind of higher low, relative to this 159 level here, which is the bottom of the top of the old progression gap. Chart still looks healthy. That's kind of all I'm watching, right? If we look at the monthly as well, like this is a pretty clear monthly, right? Where this is just clearly a pivot point at 151 to 153. Anytime it's kind of like tried to get back under 151, it's just been kind of soaked up, right? So this chart looks really good in my opinion. I do think this is going to have to take into earnings. So if you guys need to deleverage against this, by all means do so. It's your own accounts. So this is why I really haven't been adding into this one. This is why I've just been kind of letting this one do its thing, because there is inherent risk, because we do have to kind of carry this into earnings. But once earnings ends up happening, let's say we theoretically get a creek jump. Let's say this ends up ripping, right? Let's say it kind of does a little bit of pullback here. We get the higher low on the daily. Earnings happens, this rips. There's an opportunity for this to get above 181, and that's the creek jump here. And we can hold those positions. I assume they would be up because we have the 185 calls, but those should be up. But if it can base here, there's an opportunity to then roll into more aggressive positions to look for the move up into 193 to 189. Probably use the 190 calls for that. But yeah, this is going to be a sick chart, guys. Like I said, this one in its comparison to MU, right, where MU had the creek jump in this area here. right? Obviously, it pushed up and came under a little bit, but really just back tested the progression gap here, right? Off of like 103, 104-ish. Then it had another rip, another LPS SOS, which then based the creek here at 114. And then I keep, saying this over and over again. You guys can see just off of that creek jump, just off of that spot there alone, a 78% rally, right? LRCX, completely the same thing. Where it had the creek jump up here around like 89. This ended up ripping above. The entry could have been here, it could have been here, or it could have been here. But essentially the SOS LPS was in the same exact spot, 61% move off of that level there. So I think QCOM is essentially the same exact thing, just kind of playing it safe for now. Earnings ideally is the catalyst that launches it above the creek jump at 181, and then looking to roll positions into 181, and then looking for like December contracts or maybe even more Januaries, just looking for a different strike that we can roll into. So that is the plan for that one, just kind of staying patient with this one here as well. So those are the three that I have in my current position allocation, right, in terms of options. Just wanted to give you guys a quick breakdown on those. Now let's jump into some new ideas. There's a couple. Fortunately, there are two shorts. I don't know if I'm going to act on these ones, but you guys saw like HIMS is a big one that I've been talking about. And then obviously Bitcoin. But the thing is, Bitcoin is diverging from, I would say, what the markets are potentially going to do, but they're also diverging from Ethereum, right? And that's kind of the duality of what I'm looking at. I really like how Ethereum looks, but I don't like how Bitcoin looks. So, part of me just wants to be long biased and probably avoid the short, but I do want to cover the two shorts here because they could set up. But if you guys are like, why is Josh long and but he's looking to go short on like HIMS or like Bitcoin, why is he doing that? But why is he also looking to go long on Ethereum? It's a weird duality between these charts. So I just want to bring them up real quick. I'll make a decision as the time comes. Probably short side would not be as heavy as the long side, just with what's happening towards the end of the year. But I do just want to cover all of them. All right, let's talk about Bitcoin, guys. IBIT, crazy chart, right? Where we talked about how there's like multi-layered time frame distributions where, the weekly distribution was obviously here with the buy climax, the upthrust was here. This was the UTAD, but instead of it just being a one-time event, this entire UTAD was basically turned into one large daily distribution where you have the buy climax here, the upthrust, the UTAD here. UTAD was also confirmed by the retest on Friday, the high volume on the sell-off, right? The continued high volume as this kept breaking down and breaking down. But I always talk about within these daily distributions or these box distributions, how there's always the bottom of the distribution, right? The floor or the support, which is your minor sign of weakness or the MSAO, and you can look for a retest of that as it breaks underneath. Now, just looking at this chart, this came to a really crucial spot as a support where I do expect a bounce, guys, on Bitcoin. It's off of this 58.67. I'm kind of rooting for a push up. But if this were to push up, and I have it drawn here, and this retest like 61.94 to 61.75, maybe it's a little bit shallower where it only retest this spot here, right? This gap from Thursday. There is a potential to short this if we see some weakness, right? If this were to happen, this would be the LPSY of the MSAO, and we could see this reject and then start to see continued high volume selling where it comes down to 54.68, right? So I'm potentially looking at $55 puts. This could seep a little bit lower, guys. I didn't even have this marked here, but this is like 56 to 54 would be the first gap. There's another gap below that at 53.97. Has room to like 52. So this could be a nasty sell-off, guys. There's a ton of gaps down here. Does it happen in one fell swoop? I'm not too sure. I could just see lower highs happening, really volatile bounce backs that just like retest previous support levels or gaps and then sell again. But I am looking for potential short off of like 61.75 to 61.43. Maybe it even goes a little bit higher and it pushes up into this here, right? So there's a gap at like 63.90, 65, and then it breaks down and then it retests again. There's a couple scenarios here, but I'm just kind of looking for broad weakness on Bitcoin on a bounce. Maybe if it bounces back on decreasing volume and it starts to, the candle spread starts to decline, or we start to see like a bearish reversal bar, and it kind of confirms a lower high. Let's say it rejects and then it starts to sell. There could be an entry there. But this chart does not look good, guys. This looks like textbook distribution. If we go back to like SPY from like December Q1, if you guys remember that we took this trade here, right? Kind of the same thing, not as clean, but we had the buy climax that was confirmed by the sell pressure here. It created a box distribution where we had a bottom zone here, right? Kind of the same exact thing where we had a gap fill at like 576. It rallied for a very small up thrust. We got a test candle here, and then we had a small UTAD, not like a major extension, but it did UTAD over the top. And then it sold, right? It started to sell, came to the bottom of the distribution. A little bit of a fight here from bulls where, maybe you would expect some kind of bounce off of this one in a lower high. Did it get that? No, and that's fine, right? It did break under, right? And then it caught a bottom, and then it pushed up, and then the same exact thing, guys. We got a LPSY of the MSAL, right? You guys can see I have this marked. Lower high here, right? Just a retest of the previous distribution support level, or the MSAL. And then what did it do? It sold down to the bottom of the zone, and then once again lower high, and then it made a new lower low and a very big lower low, right? You guys can see, I wonder if IBIT gets the same exact thing here, where it just starts to sell massively into these gap fills that were below that a lot of people didn't think you'd get to, right? So if IBIT were to replicate that, bounce off of the gap fill here at, move this over real quick. Bounce off of like 58.67 MSAL, right, would be off of this spot here. And then who knows, maybe we get a big flush down under 58, and then we get like a capitulation again, round two, where this sells off really drastically, and then it forms an accumulation off of down here or down here. I'm not too sure how deep this would go, but this is a chart that I'm very interested in, kind of licking my chops at to kind of short Bitcoin. But once again, shorts have been really weird. We're going into the end of the year, right, where we could have that rally towards December, January, and just overall strength that's kind of dampening the effects of what the sell-off could be. So probably lighter size on this one, but it definitely has opportunity. And then another chart, guys, HIMS. I was talking about this in the chat as well. Kind of a wonky distribution, but the distribution here kind of reminds me of UNH, right? UNH as it was distributing back here, not nearly as this was a little bit not as clean as well, with the buy climax kind of being this general area here. Kind of got an up thrust, and then not really a UTAD, right? But it was just shy, and then it sold, and then we got like I would say like the weekly or monthly LPSY back here, and then you saw the distribution occur. Kind of reminded me of HIMS, same thing, right? Where the UTAD didn't necessarily break out above the buy climax, but it did get above the up thrust, sold back down, right? And then we got this like range here, right? Where it looks super, super strange on like the hourly. Let's get rid of this really quickly. Right, where we kind of had buy climax in this general range, up thrust in this general range, and then we had a big UTAD. The CEO was tweeting out or retweeting that this was a short squeeze, and then he ends up having his, like a share sell event. A lot of people were looking to scale out into this fake breakout here, and then of course it breaks down, right? So, if this can maybe get a bounce up, and I really don't know where the bottom of this would be, if I'm being completely honest. Like naturally, I was looking at the progression gap like here. Right, so if we can just kind of pull this across, I was thinking maybe this bounces off of this, but really kind of the same thing. I'm looking for a bounce off of this, an LPSY that maybe retests and fizzles out off of like 59.15 to 57.12, and then if we see some kind of sell pressure here or a reversal bar, it's pushing up on really anemic volume. I think this can break down, honestly, all the way back down to 41, guys. There's an unfilled gap here, right? And if this is a distribution, this will trade very quickly to this spot where it could break 41. Maybe a bounce off 41 that gives us another lower high, and then it breaks down, retests. And this has potential to come to 28. Not even kidding. Come down to 28 to like 20 or 35, somewhere in this zone here. So, reason I'm looking at these shorts is they could be very lucrative even with small size. That's something that I would do, is just take small size, just because, like I said, shorts have not been working. But just something I'm watching here. It is a little bit of a wonky distribution. I won't lie about that. But just looking at how this shaped out relatively similar to UNH, the redistribution occurring here, the high volume kind of confirming the fact that this was a UTAD. We saw continuation to the downside. Really gross bar where there was no downside wick, so nobody really trying to buy this up. People probably went short off of this one, so I would like to see a bounce back that shakes those guys out and just pushes back up to retest the gap, maybe a little bit shy of the gap, right? So like into the EMAs. I'd probably look to potentially pull this, but it's just kind of a, we'll have to wait and see event here. And if it does do that, I like end of year, so like December, January, $40 puts to try to target this gap fill here. And then we'll kind of take it from there. But just looking at the weekly, guys, like you guys cannot tell me this is not a mass liquidation candle, right? Like look at that candle, super high volume. Breakout traders completely trapped here, long upper wick, and then just closed in an absolute destructive candle. Like this is super gross. I don't see how, just based off of the weekly, this doesn't come lower or see continuation lower. But healthcare names do that. They shake a lot of people out and then they continue higher. And this name does have earnings coming up, so once again, are we gonna take this? I would just recommend super small size. But yeah, I had to throw these two names out there because they look disgusting. IBIT textbook distribution. HIMS, a little bit of a wonkier distribution, but the parallels are undeniable, right, with the UTAD and this kind of being like a redistributive range. So those are the two charts that I am looking short side. So let's jump into the fresh ideas that are long side. Like I said, one of them is a little bit weird because it is Ethereum, even though I'm bearish on IBIT. But the rotation has been pretty clear. The liquidations across the board were pretty clear on especially Bitcoin. If you guys didn't know, Ethereum squeezed because Bitcoin longs were hedging their longs by shorting Ethereum. So there was kind of an offset there where they blew up in kind of two different ways. So now, right, I kind of like the idea of an Ethereum long just based on fundamentals and the fact that it kind of has to play catch up, but there's been a lot of institutional accumulation going on if you guys haven't been keeping track. So let's jump into those names, and then that should be it. Okay, BMNR, guys. This is a crazy one. You guys don't know Tom Lee. This dude has been buying non-stop. A lot of institutional accumulation here. I just kind of like the look, even though it's been consolidating for a while. Really, I like ETHA or ETHU better, but this name could be explosive. Really just a large consolidation off of this like 51.43, and then obviously we had a little bit of a gap fill here at like 47, where it pushed up, pulled back down. We saw heavy buying off of this as well, right? The 47.79 pushed up again, pulled back down on controlled volume, right? And then now we're right back at 47.79. And then if you take a look at where Ethereum is, Ethereum looks like a big move up is coming, guys. Like literally, this kind of looks like I'll have to pull it up really quickly just to show you guys really quick. Hopefully you guys can see this. I want to make sure. This looks like an accumulation where this is essentially the breakout here. Let me copy this really quickly. Right? This kind of looks like the accumulation where this is now the SOS or LPS here, right? Or the creek jump, as you guys can see. Name has been lagging a little bit, right? But really looks like just the next phase where this is going to now mark up off of this zone here. So I'll just kind of draw like a rectangle really quickly off of this spot here. Clearly broke out. This looks like this could be the pullback, and then if it is to rally, this would rally up, start to kind of create bull flags above 59.57 or like 5,000, and then just rally again up in like 6K, 7K, and then start another accumulation phase a little bit higher. But this looks super good as to where it's trading relative to the highs, right? The liquidation event occurred, but it didn't break underneath the previous highs. Instead, we saw big buyers step in last week on October 6th, and now it's just kind of mitigating against the spot. So I do really like where this is trading at. If we take a look at ETHA, right? ETHA is another big chart here. The Ethereum ETF. You guys can see this a little bit more clearly, but essentially just a pullback here to the bottom of the range. Now holding 27.91. I just kind of want to watch this off 27.91. If it were to rally, pretty simple targets here where this could push up into this gap fill right around like 34 to 33. If we were able to kind of catch this off of this general range, that's like a 17% move. So looking at like BMNR off of, once again, pull this up really quick, off of that 47.79 risk, this is a good opportunity here where I think we could, make a move up into 65 and potentially 71. That's something that I'm watching. But ETHA is the other chart, or if you guys want to be a little bit riskier, I'm not going to like recommend anything, but taking a look at this chart here, this is ETHU, ETHU, which is a 2x or levered version of ETHA. Same exact thing, guys, where this kind of pulled back down into not only the 618, but that same exact gap fill, right, is just like right around here. Pulled back perfectly on this one. If you were to take this one instead, right, and it were to rally off this one and not come down into this like 82 gap. Speaking of which, guys, this 82 gap is pretty crazy. This is like back when this IPO'd or like kind of first came out, this was like the first or second sell-off, right? So we got a first low here. This was our second low and then our third low. So it's like a 3 lower low accumulation. This kind of looks like an inverse head and shoulders that's been setting up in this range, which you guys know I'm not a big fan of, but this was the gap fill down here, the gap fill from right here. It swept under, right, which was like a big accumulative range with all the high volume kind of occurring. Then it rallied, and now we're seeing more high volume here while it's still respecting, the 618 and kind of like this little gap range here. This chart looks really interesting, right? I think that they're trying to trade this through leverage, which could work out or it could blow up in their face. But, looking at everything together, Ethereum, the coin itself, looking at ETHA, the ETF, and then looking at ETHU, it looks like there's something big coming here, and the divergence between Bitcoin and Ethereum could really start to play out, guys, and that would be really painful for Bitcoin longs if they're super long Bitcoin. Ethereum continues to run. I could see Bitcoin players, getting shaken out, closing their positions, and then that reaccumulates, right, off of people trying to chase Ethereum and selling their Bitcoin off. And maybe Ethereum pushes up, and then it starts to consolidate, right? And then people think that that's a short. People will start shorting this, not knowing it's another phase of the accumulation. And then Bitcoin, like my mind's kind of going everywhere of how this can turn out in the future. But just looking at this in the present, if this were to rally off of this one and it moves up into that same gap fill, this would be a 50% move, guys, because it is levered. So, ETHU, ETHA, two things that I'm kind of looking at in tandem, or the BMNR trade, I think could be really, really nice to pair alongside NVIDIA, QQQ, and QCOM. Obviously, that's a lot of longs, but the basket is pretty small. It's like 5-6 names total. It's not like 15 or 20 that you could potentially take in this market. I really kind of like the idea here for some smaller size longs on, spread them apart, obviously, like BMNR and ETHA together. I think this trade could work out really nicely. Like I said, or if this doesn't work out, let's say it kind of rallies and it's rallying up on like low volume, and I do take the long, I can close those out, get small size, and then kind of take that in tandem with the Bitcoin short through IBIT. There's a couple of different options we got to see here. Just how does this rally? How does this open at the beginning of the week? Is it consolidating in this 2-week window of weakness, or is it selling? Right, that'll kind of give us a better perspective. But that's really all I got, guys. The only two names really that I'm kind of looking to add alongside here would be BMNR or ETHA / ETHU, or right, looking short on HIMS and what was the other one? IBIT, right? Those are like the main two. So we're just going to have to kind of wait and see how the week opens, how the next 2 weeks start to behave in terms of tape. Is it like a low volume push up? Is it a really explosive move up? And then kind of gauge it from there. So that's going to be it, guys. This is a really long video. I covered a lot. I covered like 3 of the current ones that I hold between QQQ, NVIDIA, and QCOM. I covered, 2 fresh ideas for the longs and then 2 short ideas. And then those are kind of dependent on how the market ends up reacting over the next 2 weeks or so. But this should be able to carry us for quite some time, because if this long is going to work out, guys, like, this name alone, like BMNR has a 45% move to happen, right? Or, let's say we're a little bit late and we get in off the gap fill up here and the reclaim of like 51, that's still 31%. If we look at ETHA, right, this starts to rally back above, let's just say this gap here, right, which is like the same exact thing on IBIT, and this starts to look really good, and we kind of chalk the IBIT idea, we get long above this, and that's still a 17% move, right? This has a lot of potential to run to the upside, so I won't really feel like I'm late at all, right, at all. Like if I just get rid of this here, let's get rid of the 0.5. Same exact thing here on like the ETHU chart. Right, if this rallies really hard and we chalk the IBIT idea and we go long on this, and guys, this is like a 32% move on the double levered Ethereum ETF. This is going to be sick. Same thing with ETHA, right? Same thing. Like I already went over this one. My bad. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. I wouldn't feel like I'm late to anything. It would just either be a reclaim of that MSAO or it rejects, and then the IBIT short kind of shows itself. So that's really all I'm looking at, guys, in terms of fresh stuff. So hopefully everybody watches. Hopefully everybody enjoys. Hopefully my rambling makes sense. I think I've shown you guys really well. I feel like I'm a good teacher. So just trying to keep striking while the iron's hot, guys. I think a lot of people are scared, so I think this is the opportunity to really make some moves here. Yeah, I have a couple shorts just on hand just in case things end up not looking good. So, all right, guys, that's going to be all. Hope you guys have a good night. See ya.